Hello, this is Tim Connerson. Welcome to my course, Living Under Colonial Rule, subtitle Black Life in the United States. And we're going to go through what it's like to live under colonial rule. You don't have to be black in the United States to live under colonial rule. There are plenty of people today that are living under colonial rule, many different ethnicities, some white, some black. In the modern era, many people don't realize they're living under colonial rule, but they are. And so we'll deal with life under colonial rule, and maybe you'll get a better understanding of where you're living and how you're living, and maybe even understand what some of the problems are that you could not really put a pin on, or maybe you knew but couldn't really quite understand where the problem come from. So we're going to deal today with our first person and our first books. Our first text is Harriet Tubman's Bound for the Promised Land. It's written by Kate Clifford Larson, and the notes are always go along with the lectures, so look at the notes. We often hear people say that black people have come far, but they still have a long way to go. Anyone who makes statements like that does not know a lot about U.S. history, does not know a lot about the condition of black people today, or are ignorant about both. Harriet Tubman, Bound for the Promised Land, gives us an idea of what life was like for the typical field slave, which was the typical slave. If we are courageous enough to look at Kate Clifford Larson's book about Tubman and the slavery that she faced, then compare Tubman's reality with black American people today, we would see that not much has changed. Some argue that the native black Americans are in a more horrible position than our ancestors were, or blacks on this territory. Some people like to call us Africans on this territory. All the same people. The field slave worked for at least 12 hours every day. Most of the work was hard labor. Overseers roamed the large plantations to keep slaves working and to make sure that slaves did not escape. This makes Harriet Tubman's escape and liberation of other slaves one of the greatest acts in the United States, maybe the world. The slaves are kept under control with threats and treats. You need both. You need the carrot and the stick. Field slaves are reminded that they could be sold to the most awful plantations if their masters start to lose too much money. Slave children could also be sold, breaking families apart. Field slaves are threatened with physical abuse and death if their actions weren't bad enough. And I would say punishment actually is more threat than death, because death is at least you release. But brutalizing me and leaving me alive to be in pain, that's like the worst threat. So where are we going? Punishment depended upon how many slaves the master had and how good a slave was at their job. Rewards might be that slaves keep some of the crops they pick to use or to sell. Another reward was allowing a slave to rent themselves out to other plantations for pay. A field slave had no control over any aspect of their lives. The typical American black person works for a government that does not consider us full citizens. And sometimes we are 3/5 citizens, other times we are 4/5 citizens. I always say, white conservatives consider us 3/5 citizens, white liberals consider us 4/5 citizens, and we don't even consider ourselves at all these days. We must always act and speak in a way that makes everyone comfortable at work. The post-COVID-19 world will be different. Most black people will probably not have jobs. And black people today are more vulnerable than we have ever been on this soil. Harriet Tubman shows us that real freedom has at least two parts. One part is the ability to keep other people from controlling our lives. The other part is being able to live in a way that we can contribute to our communities, towns, cities, states, and whatever social structures that we belong to. Black people who were enslaved in the United States have been fighting for freedom since we were enslaved in a racialized way. K. Clifford Lawson has documented the phases that Tubman went through to become free and free others. Tubman was a slave as far as we know. She worked as hard as the men on her plantation. We often forget about the sexual trauma that black women faced during slavery. Black men were brutalized and forced to breed. Black women were the ones black men were forced to breed with. White male masters and their friends could have sex with slave women anytime they wanted. Overseers could also have sex with black women and at any time. Not all women were raped, but the reality of attack was on enslaved black women's minds every second of every day. So if you believe something can happen to you every day, it's a state of waiting for the other shoe to drop. That's life. That's colonial life. Plantation life. We criticize the black women who choose to have sex with white masters for favors, but slaves do not have the power to choose. This is why slavery, particularly chattel slavery here, was so horrible. Tubman ran away with the help of other free black and white abolitionists. Tubman ran to free territories that protected once enslaved people. Tubman was able to exercise her freedom for the first time in her life. And Tubman did the most humane thing in the world. She helped other slaves to freedom like people helped her to freedom, paying it forward. We live in an age where black people are very materialistic, individualistic. They got to get theirs. So, again, I'm not sure we're doing better. Tubman became active in the Underground Railroad. She is the most famous spokesperson for the Underground Railroad. Tubman returned to slave states numerous times to free slaves. She's a model for how to be as free as possible. And we can be free until everyone has access, or we cannot be free, until everyone has access to freedom. So if anyone's enslaved, none of us are really truly free, including masters who have to keep us down, which means they're not free to do anything they want if they always have to keep an eye on us. Harriet Tubman showed us the price of freedom, and some say that the price of freedom is death. We must be willing to risk our lives to gain and maintain freedom. It seems like a lot, but some argue that without freedom, there is no life. We must be willing to risk our careers. And the purpose of work is to solve problems and master skills. The only two reasons why we should be working. Not to gain status and the accumulation of material objects. Sometimes we are forced to sacrifice relationships with family and friends. And some people are more comfortable without freedom. And we lose our ability to connect with anti-freedom fighters. Kate Clifford Lawson tells us that Tubman's husband was not able to stay married to her. He wanted to build a family, but Tubman wanted to free as many slaves as humanly possible. Tubman was able to create a family that could function with her activism. And Tubman had to stay away from home for months at a time. It was never assured that she would come home or return. It would take a special kind of man to keep a bond with Tubman. Her husband would have had to help her in every way possible, if only to improve Tubman's chances of returning home. These kind of people often have bad relationships because it takes a certain kind of person to be with them. That's why you have to go back and look at the Betty Shabazzes. You have to look at the Coretta Scott Kings. You have to look at the Rita Marleys and those kind of people a different way. You have to look at them a different way because it's amazing that they can be with people who belong to everybody. Maintaining freedom takes a certain amount of mental and physical energy. It is one thing to win freedom from slave masters, it is another thing to create a free society. A people who gain freedom and spend the rest of their time celebrating are doomed to become slaves again. Black Americans have not had anyone with Tubman's energy for decades, maybe century. And we have been re-enslaved with the prison industrial complex. We should promote freedom without enslaving others so that we can have a sustainable society. We all know that this situation is not sustainable. Harriet Tubman met with John Brown. Brown died to end slavery, the slavery of black Americans. Brown also risked his family's life to end slavery. No white person has risked more than Brown because we cannot risk more than our lives. We have not seen black or white people in the United States with the courage of Tubman and Brown for at least 50 years. Not many people are willing to risk careers or creature comforts to take on this system of brutality. The thought of one risking their lives to end something like the prison industrial complex is so far from anyone's mind. Brown and Tubman knew that our society could not survive unless everyone was free. Slavery is a horrible concept that is built into the social organization of the United States. Brown had the ability to go after his people, after his own people, with the force that was needed to end slavery. Brown thought that slave masters and their minions only knew one language, violence. So Brown could not defeat the plantation state. But he made such a great impact that a native black American man is discussing Brown in a course about life under colonial rule. I probably will provide a whole course about John Brown at another time. Brown and Tubman met to discuss how to change this society from a slave state into a free state. Great minds did not meet to remain theoretical space. Great minds did not meet to remain in theoretical space. They were driven to act. We are wasting our time if our goal is not to make our society better than it is or than it was. One of the reasons that the United States is on fire, quite literally in the last couple of years, is that there is less space for people like Tubman and Brown. The black community is too afraid to risk anything to embrace the concept of community. We are a community that refuses to function in any way. The brightest minds in the black community are either hated or starved, meaning neglected to death. We teach our children to be as selfish as possible and that life is about being able to pay their bills when they become adults. We don't fight for our children to have jobs to earn money or anything else. We send the most thoughtful black people off to a corner to sit quietly as native blacks fade out of existence. We will never see a John Brown again. Black people are too broken. White people need to help repair black people back into conceptual reality and let us instruct them on how to atone for 400 years of plantation and colonial social order. I'm not sure any group in the United States has the patience or will to end black suffering. Most citizens of the U.S. would rather let the whole society collapse, and they are getting their wish. We are still stuck with racism and as we reconstruct our post-quarantine society. Tubman and Brown knew the work that had to be done and did that work on the ground. We can still follow in the examples of Tubman and Brown, but our species is running out of time. Harriet Tubman was a Civil War veteran, and we don't often learn about this part of her life. Harriet Tubman, Bound for the Promised Land, gives us a lot of information about Tubman's Civil War record. Tubman saved soldiers. She had to fight to get supplies, to treat wounded soldiers. Tubman also acted as a spy, and black people were invisible to most white people unless something went wrong. The war gave black people a chance to escape slavery and fight for their own freedom. And black people have fought in every American war. That's from the Revolutionary War to the wars we're having right now with Afghanistan and Iraq. Including the Revolutionary War, black people fought to form the United States of America and were rewarded with enslavement or risk of enslavement. Black people tried to prove their loyalty to the United States in the Civil War. Black people tried to prove their loyalty as Buffalo Soldiers fighting natives. Black people fought in the Civil War and gained some limited freedom for a short period of time. And we were enslaved again with the penal system, the prison industrial complex, and before that, convict leasing, which is the first really prison industrial complex. We were enslaved again. Okay, the prison industrial complex is not new. Black people tried to prove their loyalty to the United States in World Wars I and II. Black people were forced to prove their loyalty to the United States in the Vietnam War, and black people fight in modern wars to earn money or enough money to survive and build lives for themselves. Fighting wars has never given black people any social stability. In the United States, not in any large number anyway. In the United States, Tubman fought in the only war that black people benefited from. She even fought in the Right War. I did not think it was possible to gain more admiration for Tubman until I read Kate Clifford Lawson's book. Tubman fought in the war as a healer and a spy. Wounded soldiers often looked forward to seeing Tubman coming because she fought for their survival. Tubman's drive to help the people that empires threw away was powerful and lasted a long time. Tubman had an exciting life as a spy. Freed blacks also gave Union soldiers important information about former slaves and territory. The Confederacy had too many people fighting against them to win our first Civil War. We may be on the verge of a second Civil War as I write these notes, as I dictate them to you, as I give you this lecture. That may be, another course for another time. The Confederacy would never have risen again if Lincoln had lived or Grant had his way. That too is another course for another time. Tubman leaves us asking if black people are doing more harm to ourselves and the world by fighting in wars for the United States. And black soldiers are returning home from the empire's wars in the Middle East, broken mentally and physically. These soldiers return to a society that treats them like second-class citizens. The new black standard for people going to war should be the freedom of an enslaved group. So let Harriet Tubman be our role model. This video was long. Let's see if Udemy will take it. And thank you. And until the next class, be safe and read the notes.